75 years ago today, on May 14th, 1948. David Ben-Gurion stood up in Tel Aviv, looked out over those gathered around him, and read aloud the following: "In the name of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and in the name of the people of Israel, I declare the establishment of the State of Israel in our ancient and historic homeland, and I take upon myself the role of provisional president of the state." It's a famous speech, perhaps one of the most important speeches of the 20th century. And yet it lasted only 33 seconds. It was a momentous occasion, the culmination of thousands of years of Jewish history and longing, the fulfillment of biblical prophecy and Zionist dreams. But why did he choose that day? What led up to that moment? And what happened immediately after? Well, let's go back to the beginning of 1947. At that point, Britain had controlled Palestine, or as the UN called it, Mandatory Palestine, since World War I, but by 1947, they were ready to be done with the whole thing. Much to the disappointment of many of their Jewish and Arab subjects. The British announced that they intended to end their rule and turn the area over to two separate states, one Jewish and one Arab. This plan was basically the same as the UN resolution passed in November of 1947, which proposed the creation of these two states, with Jerusalem being an international zone. The Arabs rejected this proposal outright, but a majority of the Jewish leadership accepted it. And so, on May 14th, 1948, when David Ben-Gurion stood up and declared the establishment of the State of Israel, he was doing so in accordance with UN Resolution 181. He wasn't just declaring independence from the British. He was declaring independence in accordance with the wishes of the international community. Now, if you're wondering why the British left when they did, it's because their government was in the middle of a massive transition. They recently switched from a wartime coalition government led by Winston Churchill to a peacetime government led by Clement Attlee. Additionally, Britain was facing a number of crises at home, not least of which was a housing crisis brought on by years of bombing during the war. And the British simply didn't have the resources to hold on to Palestine much longer. And so on May 15th, 1947, the British would withdraw and leave the region. But while the British were leaving, the US and the USSR weren't. Just hours after Israel was declared, the US became the first nation to recognize the new Jewish state. As I mentioned in my last video, this might seem surprising, but if you look into it, it's not that surprising at all. You can watch that video right here, and the USSR followed suit soon after. Why did they do it? Well, partly it was opportunism. By recognizing Israel before anyone else, they could shape Israel's foreign policy to be more favorable to them. But it also had a lot to do with anti-colonialism. Both the US and the Soviet Union had been staunch anti-colonial powers, railing against imperialisms and championing self-determination for oppressed peoples. The creation of Israel, the world's first modern state carved out of an area previously ruled by an empire, fit perfectly into their narratives. But back in Palestine, things weren't quite as rosy. The Arab nations, of course, refused to recognize Israel, and the fighting between Jewish forces and Arab irregulars had already begun. Nevertheless, Ben-Gurion stood up and proclaimed Israel independent. But what exactly did that declaration mean? What kind of state were they creating? Well, according to Ben-Gurion, a state based on the principles of justice and democracy. In the declaration, he wrote, "This state will be open for immigration to all Jews in the world, regardless of race or religion. It will ensure complete equality of status, rights and duties for all its inhabitants irrespective of race, religion, or gender. It will guarantee freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, and freedom of worship. It will protect the places of worship of all faiths. So there you have it. The modern state of Israel was founded on the principles of democracy and equality. Now, how did they celebrate? Well, after reading the declaration, Ben-Gurion stepped down and the crowd outside broke into song and then began to cheer. After that, the crowd dispersed and went about their days. For the average Israeli, life didn't really change all that much. What changed, though, was that now they had a government of their own. And in the following weeks and months, they got to work trying to build institutions, writing a constitution and, of course, fighting off invading Arab armies. The ceremony itself took place in the city of Tel Aviv, which would become Israel's first capital. Tel Aviv was chosen over Jerusalem because at the time it was closer to being a majority Jewish city. At the time, the UN had recommended that Jerusalem be an international city. And so the British had been in control of Jerusalem since 1946, although the city was recaptured in 1967. Israel still keeps the old city of Jerusalem, which includes the Western Wall, as an open space holy to all religions. There were approximately 650,000 Jews living in mandatory Palestine at the time, and most of those Jews were living in cities like Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. In fact, when the state was founded, 75% of all Israelis lived in cities. Of those 650,000 Jews, around half were native-born, having been born in mandatory Palestine, while the other half had come from other countries. At the time of Israel's founding, 25% of all Jews worldwide were living in Palestine. When the state was founded, the leader of the provisional government was, of course, David Ben-Gurion. But who was he? Well, Ben-Gurion was one of the founders of the modern Zionist movement. He was born in Poland in 1886 and moved to Palestine in 1906. He helped found the Jewish labor movement in Palestine and served in the British Army during World War I. He played a major role in the establishment of the Haganah, which was the precursor to the Israel Defense Forces. And he also served as the second Prime Minister of Israel from 1950 to 1963, while he's no longer with us. His legacy lives on in the form of the Ben-Gurion Airport near Tel Aviv, named for him. I mentioned earlier that the fighting between Jewish forces and Arab irregulars had already begun. What was that about? Well, the Arab nations had threatened war against the new state of Israel before it even existed. And when the British left on May 15, 1948, several Arab armies invaded. The fighting between the two sides would go on for several years and result in hundreds of thousands of deaths. Now, I've covered that war extensively in previous videos. If you want to check them out, you can find them on the playlist right here. May 14th is a day that is celebrated in Israel as Independence Day or Yom Ha'atzmaut. The holiday begins at sunset on May 13th and lasts for one day. During the holiday, people decorate their homes and public spaces with blue and white, the colors of the Israeli flag. People also attend special synagogue services and state ceremonies. The President and Prime Minister of Israel speak to the nation, and there are force flybys, and all sorts of festivities. There are parades and fireworks and lots of delicious food. It's not just a celebration of the founding of the state, but of the resilience of the Jewish people and their return to their historic homeland. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that thumbs up button. Also, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so that you never miss a video from my channel. I'll see you next time.